Aesthetics is the philosophical study of beauty and art. Although it may appear that art implies the idea of beauty, a little introspection reveals that they are in fact very different things. Is Picasso's Guernica, a wild and disturbing portrait of war, a beautiful painting? Some would say yes, others would assert that it's not beautiful per se, but most would agree that it is indeed a work of art. The question is, how do we know this?
Well, I think what the philosophy of art in a general way is what constitutes a work of art, what makes something a work of art, and what's the difference between works of art and everything else. That at least is where you've got to begin. So inevitably, as happens with, I suppose, most philosophical topics,
the systematic study of art has its roots in 5th century Athens. Plato taught that the true nature of the ephemeral things we see in the world was their idea. The triangles you draw in the sand are imperfect copies of the perfect idea of a triangle. Ideas are beyond the senses. They can only be grasped by reason. However, there is one idea that presents itself to reason through the senses, the idea of beauty.
There is a beauty by which all things are beautiful.
In the Symposium, Plato argued that the manifestation of something beautiful attracts the person who sees it. He identified this attraction with Eros, the Greek god of desire. Drawn on by the erotic appeal of beauty, the philosopher leaves behind apprehension of things that are beautiful, transcending the sensible world to achieve contemplation of the pure idea of beauty itself. Plato's ideas on beauty did not take into account the role of art in aesthetics. The fact is, Plato held a low opinion of artists and poets.
Plato didn't write about aesthetics in the sense that he wasn't writing about art. He was writing about what he saw at the time, correctly, as popular entertainment. Because Greek tragedy, like the novel in the 18th century, was popular entertainment. And the reasons that he gave for that incredibly sort of controversial decision of his to outlaw it from the great city of the Republic was ultimately 3 things. It confuses the authentic and the fake. So you end up thinking that totally fake things are the real thing, totally fake depictions of virtue or real virtue or success or greatness or courage or whatever it is. It is essentially suited only for representing vile and violent matters. After all, he says, a good person is rather boring because he never changes very much. And finally, it's capable of influencing even the best among us to act in life as we would be ashamed to do if we hadn't been exposed to art.
In the Republic, Plato explained his understanding of art as an act of treason against the idea. Because the sensible object is already a copy of its idea, in copying reality, the artist in effect copies a copy.
What is beautiful in itself is not this object or that one, but that which conveys their own nature.
Plato mistrusted poets because he believed they often spoke of things they can't truly know about.
a good society would be well served not to have any of them, and that in any case they should not be given the task of educating the youth. But in the end, I think he thought philosophers should be, since philosophers are the ones who presumably know how to tell the difference between reality and illusion.
Plato's student Aristotle composed what is undoubtedly one of the most influential books on art theory ever written, the Poetics. Many see the Poetics as a rebuttal of Plato's critique of the arts. Aristotle maintained that arousing strong emotions such as pity and fear was good for the citizenry of Athens.
I think the Poetics is actually, though it is an immensely important and magnificent work, it's very simple. It says, plays have beginnings, middle, and ends. Plays can't be too long or too short. They're better if they have happy endings than if they don't. They're better if the characters are believable than if they're not. What he's doing there is to give you the basic elementary principles showing that plays can be written badly or can be written well. Because Plato had argued that there is no art to writing poetry, that the poet doesn't know anything. The poet only knows how to imitate the appearance, say, of what a general is, or what a husband is, or what a child is. And what Aristotle is saying, that in addition to knowing how to imitate the appearance of those things, or maybe not even doing that at all, there are principles to how plays are constructed that you have to learn, and therefore poetry is indeed an art, which is what Plato famously had denied in the Ion, which said the poet works only through inspiration and doesn't know what he's doing.
Unlike Plato, Aristotle didn't discuss the idea of beauty, but rather analyzed a specific art form, tragedy.
The chief forms of beauty are order and symmetry and definiteness, which the mathematical sciences demonstrate in a special degree.
From his analysis of tragedy, Aristotle inferred specific rules of composition. The most famous of these are the three unities: unity of action, time, and place. Unity of action means that a tragedy should represent a single action with no subplots, and that each phase of that action should be the inevitable consequence of what went before. Unity of time means that the time frame of the plot should not exceed 24 hours. Finally, the action of the play should take place in the same location. In the Middle Ages, there was, strictly speaking, no aesthetics. In this period, the idea of beauty was overwhelmed by an all-consuming dedication to God. Art theory was recast merely as a matter of defining technique. At the height of the Renaissance, as the great minds of antiquity were rediscovered and translated, neoclassical aesthetics began to evolve. The vice grip of medieval principles began to loosen in the 15th century, when the Italian architect Leone Battista Alberti asserted that beauty is harmony and perfection. Beauty emanates from a work's submission to the objective aesthetic laws that govern art, and is therefore beyond the subjectivity of taste. The first of these laws is the principle of formal order. As a result, neoclassical aesthetics is an aesthetics of proportion, symmetry, harmony, and order. The foundations for aesthetics as it is studied today were laid in 18th century England during a period of remarkable intellectual activity. Here we find the first modern system of the arts, which held that the individual arts are united through imitation of nature. Here too we find the first formulation of aesthetic disinterestedness, the idea that there is a special attitude of disengagement from practical concerns that is essential to appreciating art. Joseph Addison's papers, entitled On the Pleasures of the Imagination, are widely considered to mark the beginning of modern aesthetic theory, and Francis Hutchinson's Inquiry Concerning Beauty, Order, Harmony, Design is the first systematic philosophical treatment of the subject. Morality was central to the work of Hutchinson and his contemporary, Anthony Ashley Cooper, Earl of Shaftesbury. Shaftesbury thought that there is no true aesthetic delight that did not include the good, nor was there any true moral pleasure that did not include the beautiful. Beauty and the good are one and the same. The ultimate origin of both is God, as harmony is a sign of the divine order. Hutcheson agreed with Shaftesbury that the moral sense is innate, but he also believed the human being has a sense of beauty and harmony. Hutcheson thought that the perception of beauty and harmony is mediated by the external senses to an internal sense that registers the phenomenon of beauty. For the aesthetic experience to occur, the viewer or listener needs to be knowledgeable and have a refined sensibility. But although these traits are necessary, they are not sufficient. The inner sense of beauty is innate and spontaneous.
The ideas brought about in our soul by beauty and harmony delight us necessarily and immediately, just like the other sensible ideas.
At the height of the Enlightenment, as rationality dominated philosophy, the German thinker Alexander Baumgarten posited that art and beauty belong to a middle ground between sensitivity and reason. Art, like the light of the dawn, leads us from the darkness of the merely sensible to the light of rational understanding. Baumgarten is remembered today largely for coining the word aesthetics, as well as for his influence on Immanuel Kant, the Prussian philosopher who revolutionized philosophy with a series of brilliant works. Kant took issue with Baumgarten in his Critique of Judgment, in which he put forth a systematic theory of art and taste. In another seminal work, his Critique of Practical Reason, Kant studied human action and developed his notions of duty and freedom. He concluded that as long as the realms of nature and of freedom are separated, the individual is torn apart. He is a citizen of two kingdoms. Kant claimed that the aesthetic experience makes possible the reconciliation of nature's determinism with human moral freedom. The aesthetic experience is constrained neither by natural law nor by moral law. In that playing area, sensibility and reason are brought together by means of the imagination.
In the Critique of Aesthetic Judgment, Kant says, there's almost nothing that you can't treat beautifully in the painting or in a poem. War, the Furies, I mean, he gives a list of things that you can actually present as beautiful, even though in actual fact they're pretty ugly. He said, the only ugliness that can't be beautified is the disgusting, fascinating idea. And I think he doesn't elaborate on it, but I think he had a fairly psychological theory about beauty in which pleasure plays a certain component, and the disgusting causes pain, and pain in the sense that it's in the nature of the disgusting that we want to expel it, get it out, spit it out, vomit, and so well, it's a pretty interesting idea. And he then talks about he even says the beauty and not uglification, because the ugly can be beautified, but the disgusting, that's the real antinomy. And he did elaborate on that in an earlier book.
In stark contrast with Baumgarten and the rationalist school, Kant introduced the notion that judgment of the beautiful is not rule-bound. Rather, following Hutcheson, it is based on a feeling. Though all judgments of beauty are subjective, in that they are based on feeling, they can be shared among many people. However, given their subjective nature, there can be no hard and fast principles that guide these judgments, and so there can be no exact science of the beautiful.
Kant was absolutely right when he said that the judgment of taste, the statement, "this is beautiful," is not governed by concepts, by which he meant that you can't give a description that implies that the object is beautiful. You can't say, well, she is white and symmetrical and has a peculiar look and has her maid next to her and a cat over there, and therefore she's beautiful, or it is beautiful. You can't do that. But the reason is not that beautiful is a peculiar concept, as he thought, but because the judgment of taste is not a conclusion. It is a hypothesis, or rather a guess, about what will happen when you spend time with this object. But again, as I said, you can't tell in advance what will happen. That's why I like to think of it in terms of what Stendhal said when he defined beauty as a promise of happiness. And it's a promise that needn't be kept, right? Or worse, it can be kept and be disappointing, or worse, it can be kept and be bad for you and you don't know it.
Kant said that what causes satisfaction in the judgment of the beautiful is pure form experienced in selfless contemplation. Kant took up the appreciation for the artist as creator, first articulated by Addison in 18th century England, and inspired by Longinus's Treatise on the Sublime, and gave it an influential and highly original formulation. Kant's notion of the genius artist holds that the artist is not a skilled craftsman, but rather an exceptionally sensitive and superior individual. It is in the work of the genius, the inspired artist, that nature shows her hidden face.
Through the genius, nature set rules to art.
At the end of the 18th century, Friedrich von Schiller adopted and expanded upon Kant's ideas. Schiller proposed what he called an aesthetic education, designed to imbue students with appreciation for and understanding of the arts. Schiller held that art makes us more human and is the necessary condition for any social order based on rational freedom, as opposed to totalitarian constraint.
When we develop our aesthetic capacities, we develop our moral capacities. So much so that aesthetic education renders moral education superfluous.
The Kantian theory of genius was of great importance in shaping Romanticism, a movement whose main tenet was the importance of the artist. Romantics considered personal talent to be a value in itself and took it to be innate. Following Kant, they believed that there was no school in the world that could teach someone how to create a masterpiece. Thus, the worship of the individual and unconventional genius, which began with the 18th century English philosophers, became central to aesthetics. In the 19th century, few would have doubted that Romanticism was the last word in aesthetics. The German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, in his Lectures on Aesthetics, distinguished 3 ages in the history of art. Eastern or symbolic art, which is expressed through allegories, classical art, and romantic art. Hegel believed that through art the individual expresses what she is and what she may become. In art, material things are spiritualized. Romantic art is the climax of this act of spiritualization.
The work of art is a sensible object, not only for the sensible intuition, but also for the spirit. The beautiful is defined as the appearance or the sensible reflection of the idea, of the absolute.
Hegel, whose I think his greatest book is The Aesthetics, but the whole point of the Aesthetics is to argue that we don't need art any longer. It's come to an end, actually. It was all right for a certain time when human beings were before philosophy had become strong enough to handle the kinds of questions that art could handle. Hegel has this wonderful idea that in terms of the highest interests of the spirit, that's his language, art was able to present the values that define human life in symbolic embodiments, in statuary and images, and that human beings were deeply dependent upon images for their instruction in the meaning of life. After all, Hegel came at a certain point in the history of Christianity where the whole effort of the church was to present in very vivid form the teachings of the church. Hegel thought that we've reached a point now where we don't need that. It's almost as though that belongs to the childhood of humanity.
Through his conception of historical dialectics, Hegel presented art as a completed process, not open to future innovation. Romantic art is the end point of the aesthetic dialectic, and further advances should not be expected. Hegel represents a turning point in aesthetics because he rejected representational theories of art. For example, that art imitates nature, and paved the way for the expression theories that were to dominate the 20th century. While Hegel's reflections on aesthetics were becoming increasingly influential, another German philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer, turned his thoughts to art as well. Inspired by Hinduism, Schopenhauer believed that the world is a fabric of appearances woven by our intellect. Reality itself is nothing more than the will to live, which inheres deeply in all things, not only in living creatures, but also within inanimate nature. This blind force, this impulse to live, only reveals itself through artistic contemplation. Music, above all, embodies the will to live through its incessant momentum and energy. For Schopenhauer, as for no other philosopher, music was the highest of the fine arts, the romantic art, the art of his century. Schopenhauer's theory on music as the embodiment of will was among his most important contributions to aesthetics. Schopenhauer was an early influence on the German philosopher, poet, and philologist Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche rejected Schopenhauer's pessimism and reinterpreted the will to live as will to power. In his work, The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche stated that art is a resounding yes to life, an answer that goes beyond the logical and the rational. Nietzsche believed that there are two principles in art, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The Apollonian refers to Apollo, god of the clear images that appear in the light of day and the blurred images of dreams. This principle is associated with the visual, the figurative, and the imaginary. In plastic arts, the Apollonian prevails. It is a principle of happiness, of purification through the image. The Dionysian principle of art derives from Dionysus, god of wine and revelry. Dionysus conjures the impulse to dissolve the ego, loose all limits, and submit to delirium. In lyric poetry and music, the Dionysian principle prevails. It is a principle of pleasure, where individuals recede into the universal will.
And he thought, interestingly, that those two tendencies or those two aspects of human nature are combined in what he took to be the greatest expression, greatest artistic expression in the world, namely Greek Athenian tragedy, which embodies the Dionysian in the chorus, which is there as a group, dances, sings, and comments on the action, and then on the action on the stage, which is always done in terms of individual characters, the central story of which, as Nietzsche believes, is the individual hero who tries to do something more than individuals are capable of, who gets destroyed in the process, but who's still celebrated because, in a way, it's inevitable that great human beings try to do that.
In every art, the Apollonian and Dionysian are commingled and synthesized. The spiritual core of art itself is mythological. Nietzsche's contribution to aesthetics is not a systematic program, but rather an impassioned articulation of the sacred, festive, and mythic nature of art.
Only art can replace old mythologies.
The 20th century saw an explosion of interest in aesthetics. The most pressing problem facing 20th century aesthetics, and still a point of considerable debate, was the notion of art itself. In the first half of the century, the dominant view was what is known as the expression theory of art. Its most famous advocate was Leo Tolstoy, and was definitively formulated by the Oxford philosopher R.G. Collingwood in 1938. Expression theory states that art is the expression of emotion, with expression and emotion defined in ways that are particular to the theory. In the second half of the 20th century, philosophers grew impatient with the reigning definitions of art. This was due primarily to the pressure put on these theories by the avant-garde, who refused to produce objects that fit standard definitions. In response, some turned to the new philosophy of language promoted by Ludwig Wittgenstein in his highly influential book, Philosophical Investigations, first published in 1953.
Do you think I have a theory? Do you think I am saying what this is and what that is? I describe. I give examples. You have to describe ways of living in order to be clear about the aesthetic principles.
From his chair at Cambridge University, Wittgenstein developed a revolutionary theory on the uses of language. He held that in order to understand a word, one must first consider its customary uses, because that word is nothing beyond those uses. For example, there is no such thing as the true essence of fruit, as Platonism would hold. Rather, what really exists is a series of entities, such as apples, plums, oranges, which have some kind of family resemblance. This family resemblance accounts for their common name, the word fruit.
What I am arguing, then, is that the very expansive, adventurous character of art, its ever-present changes and novel creations, makes it logically impossible to ensure any set of defining properties.
In 1956, the philosopher Morris Weitz took Wittgenstein's notion of family resemblance and applied it to art, holding that there were no necessary and sufficient conditions that made something a work of art. The best one could do was identify a formal set of resemblances. Art forms are not static, so no theory on art is actually possible, and efforts to reach a definition of art should be abandoned. Instead of wondering about the nature and essence of art, it is more useful to analyze its roles and the kind of ideas it represents. Weitz's line of thought justifies, for example, artist Marcel Duchamp's taking a urinal out of its usual context, turning it upside down, and presenting it as art. If the concept of art derives from the linguistic games in which that word is used, art is whatever we may call art, no matter what that object may be. A similar conclusion was reached by the institutional theory of art, whose major proponent was George Dickey. He proposed that a work of art could be anything that the institution of the art world designated as such. As a result of the expanded aesthetic landscape, 20th century art was characterized by innovation and relentless challenges to convention. Dadaism, Cubism, Surrealism, pop art, and other movements stretched and mutated the form and matter of art, and in the process, the idea of beauty was nearly forgotten.
Beauty was very off the table for a long time, I'd say. Certainly nobody talked about it in the 60s. If you, and I think it was really interesting that beauty disappeared, not merely from the definition, the advanced philosophical discourse on art. A handful of analytical philosophers, I think Richard Wollheim, George Dickey, one or two others, and myself, we never talked about beauty. And I think in my case, I felt it was a good thing not to. I didn't think anybody knew how to handle it. But there was I didn't seem to need it any time when I was working these things out. And not merely did it disappear from philosophy, it disappeared from art in toto, because by the end of the 60s, there was a general consensus that a work of art can look like anything. So it's not going to necessarily be beautiful. Since it doesn't mean that it can't be beautiful, but it just isn't any longer considered a necessary condition. And so it disappears from the from art, because artists were very involved in expanding what they were after, and it disappears from philosophy because any philosopher who was keeping up with what was happening would realize that there was no place for it in the definition.
Because they refused to bow down before aesthetic norms, avant-garde works could provoke incendiary reactions. Unconventional experiences, such as those created by Andy Warhol, John Cage, and other avant-garde artists, were in sharp contrast with the art of the past.
Cage, did it in a profound, even revolutionary way, when in 1952 he presented at a concert a famous piece called 4 minutes 33 seconds, where the pianist sits in front of the piano, closes the cover, counts out how many beats for the first movement, opens it. There are 3 movements, there's 4, I forget what. But it's 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And the thing is that in 4 minutes, 33 seconds, it's not that there's silence. It's just that there's nothing that you would think of as piano sounds. It's all the other sounds, the coughs, the yawns, the burps, the car horns passing in the street, the sounds of birds, all that, which we just erase from our experience. In Cage's piece, that is the experience. And it was very profound. It was a little bit of a riot when that piece was first presented, because people expected to listen to the piano. But Cage was saying, listen to the world. That's really pretty interesting. In the 60s, in particular, things changed in a very radical way. I had this very powerful experience, which I've written about more than once, of going to this exhibition of Warhol, Andy Warhol, at the Stable Gallery, which was on East 74th Street in New York. That was a show that everybody was talking about. They say, have you seen Warhol's show? It was that. It created the tom-toms in the art world. You couldn't function without seeing that show. And so I went into the show, and there were these piles of what looked like cartons from the supermarket. I've written about the Brillo box quite a lot, but there was a Kellogg cornflakes box, there was a Heinz ketchup box, there was a Del Monte peach half box. And there they were all neatly piled up in the 2 rooms of the Stable Gallery. It's since become, by the way, incorporated into the Whitney Museum, that space. But at that time, it was a very important avant-garde gallery, the Stable Gallery, and I just it was a revelation for me, because I thought that for the first time I could see how to think philosophically about art. I had never known how, and as I say, there was nothing in the literature that would have taught me how, and so forth. But here was this question just made to order. I mean, that here were these Brillo boxes, and they were in an art gallery, and they were being sold as artworks, and they looked exactly like supermarket cartons. that had no standing as art at all. It was just what I call mere real things, just utilitarian objects, part of life, and so forth. And I thought, well, so how, where is the difference between the two? And that seemed to me to be an incredible question. It could never have been asked before.
Inevitably, the avant-garde was sucked into mainstream culture. Today, once renegade genres such as jazz, films, musicals, photography, comics, and science fiction are generally acknowledged as being art.
Everywhere we look, we are inundated, we are barraged, we are sinking, if sinking can be thought of as a positive thing, in art. Television contains art. Popular music contains art. The novel, which is now the paradigm of high, fine literature and art, was, when it came up in the world, which is no more than about 250 years ago, the worst kind of popular art. Coleridge denounced it as not even a pastime, but a kill time, he said. And wherever he said the reading of novels prevails, the human mind has disappeared, and yet has now become this very, very sort of admirable and prestigious form of art. So you can't get away from it.
In 1934, American philosopher John Dewey stated that aesthetics is always linked to society as a whole. Art helps to make the life of a people. For Dewey, art was a sociological phenomenon.
Feelings aroused by a work of art are not purely a personal experience. They must be of a universal nature.
In 1936, the German philosopher Walter Benjamin observed that the concept of art had been radically altered by technological advances that enable unlimited reproduction of an artistic object. A work of art is no longer unique and unrepeatable. An original painting is only one of its kind, but a poster is not. A movie can be shown simultaneously in hundreds of theaters. A TV program can be seen by people all over the world, and it can be repeated or recorded. Aesthetics has to deal with this new reality, in particular with the power of television.
Television, and I think in the world at large, is certainly acknowledged now as a medium within which there can be art. I don't think all television is art. Some of it is news, some of it is commercial, some of it is just selling. There are all kinds of things. The same way that not all painting is art. I mean, some of it is painting walls, some of it is making advertisements, some of it is decorating houses, some of it is art. Is intended to be art, some of it becomes art without being intended to be art, but anyway, television is like writing. Some writing is literary, most is not. Some television is artistic, so to speak, most is not. Books are being written right and left about it. I mean, you go to any bookstore, you look at the media section, and you're overwhelmed by what is happening. What I think has not happened is that serious intellectuals have not paid enough attention to it, or when they have, by and large, they've either denounced it as a whole or defended it in not particularly useful terms. Some work is very, very good, there's no question about it. But there's still something, in a way, suspicious about liking television among academics, among intellectuals at large, because people tend to think about it as a monolithic thing, as a single thing, which you have to either accept or reject in its entirety.
Contemporary aesthetics involves the observer in the creation of the artistic object, demanding a new sensibility for both artist and audience.
What is it to appreciate a work of art? Is it to have a feeling? Is it to have a cognitive reaction to it? Is it to have something much more complex? For example, I believe that to appreciate a work of art is not enough to say it's great. It's not enough to feel good. To appreciate it, if you do appreciate it, is to live with it. And to live with it means, on a very elementary level, not a highfalutin philosophical level, it means to change your habits. And if you find a work of art that you like, it means you'll go to see it, or read it, or listen to it, or whatever it is. It means you'll talk to other people who see it, or listen to it, or look at it, or whatever is left. You will read different books. You will meet different people. You'll go to different parts. You'll travel in places you wouldn't have traveled before. In other words, when you like something in this way, you literally change your life on its account. And the question is, what effect does that have in the long run? And many people think that, well, if art is to be appreciated, it should have good effects. And by good, I mean morally good effects.
And so the philosophers should be able to help people think a little bit more clearly. But at the same time, you got to be careful. Go back to that issue of Barnett Newman and aesthetics is for the artists as ornithology is for the birds. I think the people in aesthetics thought that that's what they should be doing. And I think Newman was saying they thought, here's the esthetician, and here are the artists. And that's like saying, here's the ornithologist. And then the birds all line up, and the ornithologist lectures them on what it's like to be a bird. And so, well, then they don't need ornithologists for that.
The philosophical engagement with the arts, which we now call aesthetics, dates back to the very beginnings of philosophy itself in classical Greece. It was then, and continues to be, concerned with artist, artwork, and audience, at times with emphasis on one of these or another, at other times juggling the three simultaneously in an intricate dialectic. Art, of course, has a history. So too, therefore, does its philosophy. As art goes on growing, stretching, and challenging, philosophers continue to unravel and attempt to make sense of the human compulsion to create works that have no discernible practical purpose, but which we relish and admire nonetheless.